Global shifts, local impacts. We connect the dots so you don't have to. From the BizNews studios, welcome to BizNews Daybreak for Friday, the 13th of February, 2026. I'm Alec Hogg. Here is the context you need to win the day. Cyril Ramaphosa delivered an upbeat State of the Nation address. This is the time that South Africa's president gets to tell the country what's happening and where he's taking our nation. Well, we got more of that coming up later. There was little global reaction to it, with the rand still taking its cue from precious metals, and we saw a day beginning at 15 Rand 96 against the US dollar, and this on the back of gold, which rose about 1% to just over $5,000 an ounce. But first, before we get into Cyril's SONA, here's the freshest news from our partners in New York.
The top lawyer for Goldman Sachs, Kathy Ruemmler, will leave this summer after documents released by the DOJ revealed the extent of her ties with sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Ruemmler held extensive discussions with Epstein between 2014 and 2019, years after he pleaded guilty to state charges of soliciting prostitution from a minor. Ruemmler joined Goldman in 2020. She will exit as general counsel on June 30th. In a statement, Goldman CEO David Solomon said, Ruemmler will be missed. The Trump administration has made what could be the largest rollback of environmental protections in years. Today, the president rescinded the so-called Endangerment Finding. This is a scientific determination that greenhouse gases pose a threat to human health and welfare. Here is Trump making the announcement.
We are officially terminating the so-called Endangerment Finding, a disastrous Obama-era policy that severely damaged the American auto industry and massively drove up prices for American consumers. Prices went up incredibly for a worse product. This action will eliminate over $1.3 trillion of regulatory costs and help bring car prices tumbling down dramatically.
Now, environmental groups have pledged to challenge this decision in court. The U.S. and Taiwan have finalized a trade agreement. It will reduce tariffs on goods from Taiwan. It will also boost access for American goods in Taiwan's market, including liquefied natural gas and crude oil. Here is Bloomberg's Laura Davison.
The kind of the underpinning of the U.S.-Taiwan relationship is this military relationship. The U.S. is Taiwan's main military backer, and Taiwan is worried that if the U.S. is no longer as dependent on Taiwan, that could change the balance of that relationship. However, a win for Taiwan here is they did get this agreement finalized before Trump's scheduled meeting to meet with Xi Jinping in April. This was a concern that if this deal was still out and really open for negotiation, that Xi Jinping could get Trump to back down on some of these key things that the Taiwanese want.
That is Bloomberg's Laura Davison. In business news, the crypto exchange Coinbase reported revenue in the fourth quarter tumbled by more than 20%. And that meant the company swung from a profit of $1.3 billion in Q4 last year to a net loss of $667 million. We got reaction from Bloomberg's Monique Molima.
Coinbase, they are the largest cryptocurrency exchange in the U.S. They are on much solid footing compared to some of the smaller crypto firms that are out there. But, analysts are also expecting that cryptocurrency is going to continue to kind of see a downturn going through this year. So that's going to continue to weigh on Coinbase, even if they can weather it for now.
That is Bloomberg's Monique Molima. Shares in Coinbase were down by more than 15% in late New York trading.
On Wall Street, the impact of AI continued to weigh heavily on investor minds. The Nasdaq was off 2% and the S&P was down 1.5%. So it wasn't just Coinbase and its awful financial results that gave a little bit of courage to the bears who've been, cowed for a long, long time. Palantir fell 5% and it's now below $130 a share, the first time it's been at that level in 8 months. Apple lost 5% and Tesla and Meta were both 3% lower. On the local front, Sasol's recent strength continued. The shares there jumping 7% yesterday. They're now at 126 Rand, the best finish for the oil from coal operator since August last year. Well, on to the big local news now. President Ramaphosa's address was a classic game of two halves. On the macro front, he was bullish, hailing 4 quarters of economic growth, even though they were kind of very low. The end of load shedding, hurrah, and South Africa's removal from the grey list, hurrah, double times. This is a big deal for the country on its trading and the financial front. Great work there being done by the team at Treasury. To keep that momentum, Ramaphosa has promised a massive 1 trillion rand infrastructure drive. Forgive my modest reaction to this one, but we've heard that story numerous times before. I remember getting terribly excited just after Jacob Zuma came into the presidency when he said he would turn South Africa into a construction site. Well, we know how that ended up. But also, to his credit, Ramaphosa did not sugarcoat the reality on the ground. He admitted that water has now replaced electricity as South Africa's biggest crisis. Well, you didn't need to tell the people in Joburg that. He is taking personal charge, is Ramaphosa, of a new national committee to address the water issue. He also flagged organized crime as an immediate threat, confirming military deployments in Gauteng and the Western Cape. Crucially for investors, mining is back in favor. Peter Major and I had a conversation after yesterday's Mining Web Weekly, where he wanted to take me a bet on how many times, if at all, Ramaphosa would mention mining in the SONA. It seemed appropriate given that this is the week of the mining indaba, where the whole mining world has come to South Africa. We settled on 2. Well, he did better, did our president this time around. Ramaphosa explicitly rebranded mining as a sunrise industry, and he referred to 40 trillion rand in reserves. Now, that's a big story, and one that Peter Major talks about in a little while, on how far we've gone back, and indeed how we could unlock that incredible endowment. What Ramaphosa did, instead of unlocking any endowments or giving that 40 trillion rand in reserves an opportunity to be exploited, he highlighted a strategic 300 million RDC investment into a company called Frontier Rare Earths. It's a project in the Northern Cape, and as the name implies, it's to do with rare earths. This is a strategic project by the European Union, so clearly there's some funding coming in there. The company is listed, or rather, it's a private company. It's based in Luxembourg, just around the corner from the high-grade deposit at Steenkamp. And, well, we've got this fantastic deposit that is privately owned and struggling to get its head above water. And here our government goes and throws 300 million rand. It's peanuts, really, in mining terms, where the guys there talk about tens of billions when they are looking at projects. But anyway, I suppose something is better than nothing. As mentioned in our Mining Web Weekly interview yesterday, Peter Major explained that South Africa really has a long way to go to become this sunrise industry that it has such potential for. Pete's been going on about this for decades. And he used a very specific instance here by saying that the one-time colossus, South Africa, was the undisputed heavyweight champion on the African continent. Everybody else was like featherweights against this Muhammad Ali. And now, well, we're even smaller than the DRC.
Now look at the Congo that literally had zero copper production 25 years ago. They were down to 30,000 tons a year. You know, O'Keefe Copper could put out 30,000 tons a year. And here that's all the whole DRC did 25 years ago. They're somewhere over 3.3 million tons of pure copper. They are a solid number 2 now. And Friedland likes saying, oh, they're breathing down Chile's back. Not quite, but they passed Peru. Peru did 3 million tons the last few years. They have zoomed by there. Peru's now down to 2.9. Chile is about 5.5 million tons, trying for 6. The DRC, if you got 3.3 million tons of copper, and copper is $13,000 a ton, and South Africa is producing 50 billion compared to 40 billion for DRC. And that's our iron ore, our gold, our PGMs, our chrome, our manganese, our coal, our heavy mineral sands, our diamonds. We're producing this wide range of all these minerals. And yeah, it sounds good. Oh, we did 50 billion last year. And here's the DRC. Sometimes we're not even sure it's a country. It's many provinces with warlords. It's got a full-time terrorist revolution going on there on its eastern border with Rwanda. And yet, just their copper. Add in the cobalt and the gold. DRC's passed us.
It's peaceful in South Africa. There's so many advantages that you have. And yet, this place, which has all chaos, is doing better. There's got to be a massive obstacle that's stopping people from going forward. And I think we all know that with regulations. Was there any sign that any pennies are starting to drop within the South African government, this government of national unity, that they see the opportunities are vast, that there are so many people who could be employed, so much revenue that could be generated for the country by our mineral endowment? Was any of that evident at the Mining Indaba?
It wasn't to me, Alec. No, I didn't pick up that. It's unlikely to pick it up because this government has shown us for the last 25 years since they introduced the MPRDA, which is in 2002. They've shown us they're only going one way, and it's down in the rut. Each time they have another version of the MPRDA, it looks more punitive than the other. And whatever happened, this was only going to be for 10 years, and that was going to take into account all the historical injustices, and then they were going to get rid of the MPRDA. Well, boy, we now know it is welded. BE is welded. There is no talk of even mellowing out on that.
I guess the optimist in us should say, we've got a good reason to get back on top again. And market leaders really can get to the top of the pile if they apply the right strategy. Let's hope somebody in Pretoria is listening to our guru, Peter.
Cody from Paul has sold multiple vehicles to WeBuyCars. Suspicious? I think so.
Is that a crime?
No. Where are you getting the cars?
I buy them and I sell them at the spot like a normal person.
Okay.
No, man, I'm just an accounting student. I know a good deal when I see one.
That's Excel meant. What's more stressful, tax season or selling a car at WeBuyCars?
Tax season, obviously.
WeBuyCars, the easiest way to sell your car by far.
Well, someone in the Western Cape is going to have to start listening to the election results, because if you thought the Western Cape was an impenetrable DA fortress, think again. In by-elections this week, the Patriotic Alliance delivered a bruising wake-up call to the official opposition in George, surging from 22% to a massive 65% of the vote. To unpack the numbers and why the DA is in big trouble in its own backyard, here's independent election analyst Wayne Sussman, who gave the details to my colleague Chris Steyn.
Let us go to George, where the Patriotic Alliance had another big win.
Correct. The Patriotic Alliance have found a very happy hunting ground in George, the third most populous municipality in the Western Cape. In about the middle of January, third week of January, we spoke about two by-elections in George where the PA took seats off the Democratic Alliance. Well, yesterday they didn't just take a seat off the Democratic Alliance, they got their best ever percentage in a George election, and certainly a George by-election, where they moved from 22% of the vote to 65% of the vote, and really gave the DA a shellacking in the area of New Dawn Park, which is near the Tembeletu township, in the eastern part of George. And the DA falling from 46% to 34%. The African National Congress, they weren't in the running, but they didn't even get 1% of the vote. So just to break this down, why this result is particularly meaningful for the Patriotic Alliance. When we spoke in the third week of January, we said the key to the Patriotic Alliance winning these awards is, one, they're holding on to their support. Two, the smaller parties like Good and Plaaslike Besorgde Inwoners and other local parties are moving over, because they're not on the ballot, and are moving over their support to the PA, and the ANC are moving over their support to the PA. The other thing we said, and it held true last night, is that the PA are registering new voters or voters who've sat out previous elections. However, last night they were also able to win over a good chunk of Democratic Alliance voters. And this is really interesting as we observe the road to the local government election, the PA getting well over 60% of the vote. And just to explain what has happened in George, in 2021, the Patriotic Alliance only won one single proportional representation seat in George. They were sitting in the cheap seats. They weren't a player in George politics. They are now the third largest party in the George Council. They have won 5 consecutive by-elections. They've won a seat of the Good Party, and now they are 4 for 4, off the Democratic Alliance, including 3 seats in the space of 3 weeks off the Democratic Alliance. The DA are in deep trouble in George, and the PA are on the rise.
We close off today's program, and indeed the Daybreak shows for the week was one of the most troubling stories to emerge recently. It's the refusal of a top Johannesburg high school, Roedean, to play a tennis match against a Jewish counterpart, King David. This involved 16-year-old girls who were out to just have a little bit of good, clean, sporting fun. Well, it's a moment that has forced many to ask uncomfortable questions about where South Africa is heading. I asked South Africa's favorite stockbroker, a man I've worked with for decades, David Shapiro, to elaborate on great concern that he expressed in some WhatsApps that he sent me earlier in the week. And as Dave tells us, it's not just about sport. It's about leadership, or rather, the lack thereof. Here's Mr. Shapiro with a deeply personal take on the Roedean King David saga.
I'm apolitical, Alec. I don't like to get involved in politics. I look at the economy, and I like to focus on what should be done in the economy, where we should be going. That's always been the angle that I've taken. This struck a chord with me, and it upset me. That there was this overt act against Jewish kids. My kids are there. I've got grandkids there. All those names that you mentioned have either been there themselves or have children there themselves. And I'm surprised that they're not standing up. And I think the fear is the fear of a backlash. And you can get a pretty violent backlash. I picked up on social media the violent action that I got from actually defending or highlighting it. And in the first tweet, I said, I hope this isn't true. And this came from very prominent people, the hatred against Jews, associating any Jew, particularly King David, with Zionism. Okay, that was the connection, which I said, hold on a sec, you don't know the community. Yes, there's an affiliation, but not every Jew in South Africa is necessarily believes in, they want Israel to survive. They want it to thrive and prosper and so on. But you can't brand them as Zionists. From that point of view, therefore, it was correct not to play against King David. That was the line of thought. Now, I want to tell you another point. Alec, the anti-Semitism against the Jewish community here in South Africa and against Jews worldwide didn't start after the IDF invaded Gaza. It wasn't because of the bombing. It started when Hamas invaded Israel flags came out cheering the action against apartheid Israel. And that's when it started. And that's where the gathering of this hatred began, which had been building up for a long time. And that was the odd thing. No matter what Israel did, they were damned. You know, we can debate for hours whether they did the right thing, whether they didn't do the right thing. But it was at that time, in fact, on October the 7th, that the hatred against the Jews happened. And also, once Israel invaded, the anti-Semitism that's always there, that's been around for 3,000 years, it actually triggered, it gave people the license now to be overtly anti-Semitic.
You remember the poet Niemöller? First they came for the Jews. It's worth having another read. And now you have the edge. For the full interviews and the details behind these stories, head over to biznews.com. I'm Alec Hogg. Thanks for starting your morning with us. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back on Monday. But now, go and seize the day.